Hello everyone, I am Advait Kauta and today we're going to be starting a new series in this channel because the history of humankind episodes, they are on the way, but they take a lot of time, they take a lot of research and script writing work. So when my grade 8 friends asked me, why don't you cover grade 8 social studies? So I said, of course, let's do that. So today we are going to be covering CBSE grade 8 social studies. तो चैप्टर शुरू करने से पहले do you remember these figures that we studied in grade 7? Well, you'll remember that ये 6 लोग, they were the first 6 Mughal emperors: Babur, Humayun, Akbar, Jahangir, Shah Jahan and Aurangzeb. So these 6 were known to be extremely powerful. लेकिन after Aurangzeb's death in 1707, Mughal power started coming to an end. वो धीरे धीरे डिक्लाइन होने लगी. और उसी टाइम पे इन द अर्ली 18th सेंचुरी एक और नई इंटरनेशनल पावर वाज इमर्जिंग एंड दिस पावर वाज ब्रिटिश. सो हम इस चैप्टर में देखेंगे कि हाउ डिड द ब्रिटिश सेटल इन इंडिया एंड हाउ डिड दे स्लोली एक्सपैंड देयर कॉलोनियल एम्पायर आफ्टर द फॉल ऑफ द मुगल्स. सो लेट्स बिगिन, शैल वी? तो हमारी एक्चुअल स्टोरी शुरू होती है इन द ईयर 1600. In this year, a company in Britain called the East India Company got a royal charter to trade overseas. So, what is a charter, you may ask? तो एक charter एक official document होता है which is to grant permission for something. In this case, the East India Company was given permission to trade overseas. तो इसका मतलब था in all of Britain, only this company had the right and authority to trade with other countries. So only the East India Company could trade with other countries. But this was limited to Britain, and keep that in mind. So 1600, a charter was granted to East India Company by Queen Elizabeth I. So who were this East India Company? Well, basically they were traders. They were not any they did not maintain an army or anything, but they were simply just traders. उनको अपने ट्रेड की प्रॉफिट्स चाहिए थी. एंड एट द टाइम इंडिया वाज फ्लरिशिंग इन ट्रेड. हमारे पास बहुत ही ज्यादा रिसोर्सेस थी which almost everyone in the world wanted, which was a problem क्योंकि before the British landed in India, there were other world powers that landed in India. So as we all know, the first person to discover the sea route to India in 1498 was Vasco da Gama. So Vasco da Gama was Portuguese, and hence the Portuguese were the first to discover a sea route to India. The Portuguese. इनके बाद आए Dutch. So the Dutch were basically from the Netherlands, and finally after the Dutch came the French. इन सब के बाद यानी इतनी ये 3 वर्ल्ड में सबसे पावरफुल पावर्स थी, और इनके बाद फाइनली आई ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी फ्रॉम ब्रिटेन. तो अभी जब इतनी सारी वर्ल्ड पावर्स थी, ऑल ऑफ दीज वर नॉट इंटरेस्टेड इन कॉन्करिंग इंडिया. इन सबको बस अपने ट्रेड के प्रॉफिट्स चाहिए थे. ऑल दे वांटेड वाज टू बाय एंड सेल गुड्स व्हिच वर नॉट अवेलेबल इन देयर कंट्रीज एट द टाइम, which was the sole interest because they were mercantiles. Mercantiles are people who are basically traders, yeah, merchants. Mercantiles bolte hain. So these people just wanted their trade profits. So let's take an example first. तो आप imagine कीजिए, आपके locality में there are let's say 4 families, and now that it's summer, all these 4 families want mangoes. लेकिन the problem is there is only one person selling these mangoes. तो अभी आप सोचिए, 4 लोग जिन सभी को एक ही प्रोडक्ट खरीदना है, बट बेचने वाला एक ही है, और इस बेचने वाले के पास लेट्स से सिर्फ 3 आम है. तो अभी क्या करेंगे? और लेट्स से देयर इज ओनली 1 मैंगो, नॉट इवन 3. देयर इज लेट्स से 1 मैंगो. नाउ क्योंकि ये यहाँ पे सिर्फ एक ही आम है, द मैंगो बिकम्स रेयर फॉर दैट लोकेलिटी, क्योंकि मैंगोज आर यूजुअली फेमस, बट इन दिस लोकेलिटी क्योंकि कम अवेलेबल है, ज्यादातर लोगों को वो चाहिए होगा. which means that there is a lack of supply. In economics we call this supply. जब ज़्यादा लोग बेच नहीं रहे होते एक प्रोडक्ट को, तो we say that there is a lack of supply. Now, because there are 4 people, a larger number than the number of mangoes being sold, because इतने सारे लोग हैं, there is a high demand because everyone needs it, and that need for that product is what we call demand. तो इस demand की वजह से people are ready to pay how much ever they want for this one mango. So let's say this one mango comes for 100 rupees at first. So one of the people gets the mango and now 15 लोग बचे, but बेचने के लिए एक और आम है ही नहीं, तो उस आम को इंपोर्ट करने के लिए और ज्यादा पैसे लगेंगे, तो उस वजह से लेट्स से इट बिकम्स 200, एंड फॉलोइंग द सेम पैटर्न धीरे धीरे द प्राइस राइजेस, इट स्टार्ट्स गेटिंग डबल, और ऐसे इंक्रीज होते होते लेट्स से इट इंक्रीज टू 1000 रुपीज. नाउ इसका मतलब है कि ये एक आम इज वेरी वेरी प्राइस्ड एंड एक्सपेंसिव. इंडिया में something similar was happening. So there were 4 colonial powers, all of which wanted Indian goods. Unko they wanted goods which were not available to them in their countries. But there was only one person selling all of this. There was only one institution selling all of this, and that was the entire country of India. So naturally, they were interested, and hence, following the same pattern of the increasing prices because of huge demand and lack of supply, the goods were very pricey in India. लेकिन तब ब्रिटिश और बाकी वर्ल्ड पावर्स को एक आइडिया आया. They started looking at why this problem started, because there are 4 colonial powers, or at least that's how they saw it. तो उन्होंने सोचा कि ये 4 की जगह अगर सिर्फ एक बचा तो ये सारे जो goods है वो सिर्फ एक ही को मिलेंगे. And so began battles. Everyone wanted to be the only colonial power that settled in India. And because Britain had a lot of guns and a lot of ammunition at the time, they were able to capture a lot of places and hence secure the trade in India. Now, how did they do that? Well, this is interesting because these are war tactics that they used. So war tactics में क्या करते थे? Let's say there's a coastline, or this is for example Bengal. Now वो क्या करते थे? बंगाल की इस coastline पे अपनी ships लगा देते थे. So they used to guard the coastline in a way. तब अगर कोई और ship है, let's say this is a Portuguese ship, or there's another Dutch ship that's coming, they would shoot down all of these ships. तो इस वजह से they were securing their rights to trade in all of Bengal. So the other colonial powers had no choice but to move back, क्योंकि उनके लिए there was enormous loss of life, profits, and hence the British were able to secure their first place. That was the place of Bengal. But इस वजह से there was a problem. The British found it hard to separate their politics and trade. Now what do I mean by that? Because there is a clear distinction between these two. But well, let's say tomorrow I become the defense minister of India और मैं कहूंगा कि मैं अपने सारे troops चाइना में लैंड करना चाहता हूँ. How will the Chinese feel about it? वो क्या बोलेंगे? Will they say, oh okay, this is nice, this is great for our country, or will they resist? Well, obviously they will resist, क्योंकि no one likes being subjugated by another country. So the local people at the time in Bengal started doing the same. They wanted their own supreme authority in that region, and they did not want it to be challenged by the British. उनको ये नहीं चाहिए था कि ब्रिटिश उनके एरिया में आए और अपने कैंप सेटअप करे और वहां के कल्चर बदल दे. And hence they found it hard to separate politics and trade. So because they both commonly wanted this land, British क्या करते थे? They used to bribe officials, or they used to maintain good relations with them ताकि उनको more and more land मिल सके. To maintain that, they needed better politics, but at the same time they had to carry on trade. Now because this trade was so reliant on politics, मतलब अगर politics ठीक से नहीं की जा रही थी तो trade ठीक से नहीं हो पाती, because there's not enough land and not enough coastline that is being captured. तो इस वजह से they were not able to separate their politics and trade. और इसी तरह से they slowly started turning into somewhat of colonists. So as we saw, their first ever expedition or their first ever capture was that of Bengal. So they set up their first factory in Bengal in the year 1651 on the banks of the river Hooghly. तो उन्होंने सिक्योर कर ली थी हुगली एंड दैट पर्टिकुलर रीजन ऑफ बंगाल. तो दे स्टार्टेड बिल्डिंग अ फैक्ट्री ओवर देयर. लेकिन अकॉर्डिंग टू द ब्रिटिश ये फैक्ट्री का आइडिया वाज डिफरेंट. अभी द सेकंड आई से फैक्ट्री यू प्रोबेबली इमेजिन ह्यूज चिमनीज और वहां से स्मोक निकल रहा है एंड देयर आर पीपल वर्किंग डे इन डे आउट. बट that was present in a British factory, but what they called a factory was different from what we think of a factory now. So they didn't just build a single home and just leave it there. They didn't build a single factory and leave it there. They were slowly expanding. So इसी region में they used to invite people from other places to come and join them. And that's how they slowly started expanding the amount of land they required. And धीरे धीरे उन्होंने एक city build करनी शुरू कर दी थी. And that is what I meant when their concept of a factory was different. उन्होंने फैक्ट्री को एक बिल्डिंग की तरह नहीं देख रहे थे. They were thinking of it as more of a township that they could develop to assert their control to capture trade mainly. So ऐसे ही तरह they did the same in Bengal and they had captured 3 villages by bribing local officials. By bribing the Nawabs, they had captured 3 villages. और इन सारे 3 villages में धीरे धीरे उन्होंने expand करना शुरू कर दिया using their concept of this factory. At the same time, now there's a concept where if you're bringing in goods from another country, say into India, and you're bringing it in from China, then the Chinese will have to pay a certain amount of taxes to, or it's actually the other way around. Let's say the Chinese have taken some goods from India and now उनको वही goods घर वापस बेचने. So to send these goods back to China to trade, they had to pay taxes. मतलब say the Chinese come to India, they buy whatever, let's say tea. उन्होंने Indian tea खरीदी और वो भी वापस ले जा रहे अपने goods. They want to sell their goods back to the Chinese people. So to sell those goods, they have to pay taxes. लेकिन अभी बिकॉज द ब्रिटिश वर मास्टर्स इन ब्राइबिंग, वो पैसों से कुछ भी हैंडल कर सकते थे. एंड सो दे ब्राइब द लोकल नवाब एंड हेंस दे नाउ डिड नॉट हैव टू पे दीज टैक्सेस. दे वर एग्जम्प्टेड फ्रॉम पेइंग दीज टैक्सेस. और इस वजह से द ब्रिटिश वर एबल टू एक्सपैंड इवन मोर. बट वो इस चीज से खुश नहीं थे. उन्हें चाहिए था कंप्लीट कंट्रोल ऑफ ट्रेड. Now, these were pretty huge concessions because they did not have to pay taxes and they could just get any amount of land they wanted at any point in time by issuing bribes. But they still wanted more. So, this time, trade used to be divided up into two segments. There used to be private trade and there used to be company trade. Now, under private trade, you had to pay taxes. Only under company trade did you not have to pay taxes. Company trade is basically अगर ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी की साइड से तुम कर रहे हो ट्रेडिंग and all the profits go to the East India Company, then that is company trading. And company trading did not require taxes. Whereas if officials of the East India Company came and they were buying goods for themselves for their private use, then they had to pay taxes. But these private traders did not want to pay taxes now. So obviously, the Nawabs at the place were in that period were pretty angry क्योंकि इस वजह से the kingdom started getting losses and no king will tolerate that. On top of that, the British also did a few other things which kind of angered these Nawabs. वो क्या कर रहे थे? बंगाल की जो कोस्टलाइन थी, अभी instead of just building their factories there, they had started building forts. So they were bringing in military from Britain and establishing their military points in India. What do I mean by that? So पहले वहां पे सिर्फ एक फैक्ट्री बिल्ड कर रहे थे जहां पे प्रोडक्ट्स मैन्युफैक्चर करेंगे, सेल करेंगे, इवन दो दैट वाज मोर ऑफ अ सेटलमेंट, इट वाज जस्ट अ सेटलमेंट स्टिल. वहां पे कोई मिलिट्री पीपल नहीं रहते थे, वहां पे बस लोग जो रहते थे नॉर्मल ट्रेडर्स थे. बट अभी क्या कर रहे थे, दे वर ब्रिंगिंग इन पीपल फ्रॉम ब्रिटेन, एंड दीज वर नॉट नॉर्मल पीपल, दीज वर द आर्मी. So this meant that if they did not like the rules of the Nawab, वो जाके नवाब को इन्वेड कर सकते थे. And that was a huge threat to the Nawabs of Bengal. So they had to do something, and hence was born the Battle of Plassey. But Battle of Plassey पढ़ने से पहले, let's take a look at what the textbook says and some of the important points mentioned in the textbook. So here in East India Company comes East, which is the first section on page number 10. It reads, in 1600, the East India Company acquired a charter from the ruler of England, Queen Elizabeth I, granting it the sole right to trade with the East. So जैसे हमने starting में देखा, in the year 1600, East India Company को एक charter मिला to trade overseas. So they were the only ones who could trade overseas, but just from Britain. Okay, उसके बाद we can skip a few lines. We also have the definition of a mercantile. As I mentioned, a mercantile is a business enterprise that makes profit primarily through trade, buying goods cheap and selling them at higher prices. तो जैसे हमने देखा, they were basically traders. Mercantile is nothing but traders. Okay, इसके बाद second paragraph में we read, the royal charter, however, could not prevent other European powers from entering the eastern markets. By the time the first English ships sailed down the west coast of Africa, round the Cape of Good Hope, and crossed the Indian Ocean, the Portuguese had already established their presence in the western coast of India. So, as I said, the British were not the first to arrive in India. There were three other powers that came in India. वो क्या क्या थी? The first were the Portuguese in the year 1498. उसके बाद came the Dutch, next came the French, and finally came the British. तो इस पैराग्राफ में हम उसी के बारे में पढ़ रहे थे. Next, in the third paragraph, we read, the problem was that all companies were interested in buying the same things. The fine qualities of cotton and silk produced in India had a big market in Europe. Pepper, cloves, cardamom, and cinnamon too were in great demand. Competition amongst the European companies inevitably pushed up the prices. So, जैसे हमने देखा, because everyone wanted to buy the same thing, and as we saw that example of the mangoes and four people in a locality wanting just one mango, in the same way prices were increasing. So जैसे हमने देखा, there was high demand but lack of supply. इसकी वजह से prices started going up. Next in the paragraph we read about all of this. So we read how the British started guarding their coastlines, and कैसे they established their military presence and shot down foreign ships that were entering into their territory, ताकि they could secure their position in the markets. समझ आया? And उसके बाद हम पढ़ते हैं, East India Company begins trade in Bengal. Here some of the important points are, the first English factory was set up on the banks of the river Hooghly in 1651. So 1651 river Hooghly, this is a very important point because यहीं पे British presence began in India. Okay, then in the end we read by 1696 it began fortifying. So जैसे हमने देखा, they started building forts and bringing their armies, and the exact year when this started happening was the year 1696. Apart from this, it also talks about bribes and how they persuaded the Mughal emperor, the ruler of India at the time, to issue a farman granting the company the right to trade duty free. इसका मतलब था they did not have to pay taxes, but this too had a problem. If you were trading on the company's behalf, then you didn't have to pay taxes. Taxes की जरूरत नहीं थी. But if you were a private trader, then tax pay करने की जरूरत थी if you were not trading from the company's side. But later we see the company tried to continually press for more concessions and manipulate existing privileges. So यहाँ पे हम read करते हैं about the private and company trade का difference and how they still wanted more and more concessions, and उसकी वजह से Bengal's trade was taking a hit. And now the Nawab could not stand there and say, oh, this is fine, nothing's going to happen to my kingdom. He cannot. because something is definitely going to happen to his kingdom, and the most obvious one is economic loss. तो अगर आप देखेंगे, गवर्नमेंट डज नॉट मेक इट्स ओन मनी, दे डू नॉट डू अ जॉब, राइट? तो उनको पैसे कहां से आएंगे? वेल, दे गेट देयर मनी फ्रॉम टैक्स पेयर्स. लेकिन अभी क्या कर रहे थे ये कंपनी वाले? टैक्स पे ही नहीं कर रहे थे, which means that the kingdom and the government at the time, उनको पैसे नहीं मिल रहे थे. So they were facing economic losses, and that is how the Nawabs of Bengal were extremely furious about this loss of economic profits and lack of economic profits for the state of Bengal. And apart from this, the British also did a few other things which led to the Battle of Plassey. Now keep in mind, ये एक बहुत ही important question है, तो please pay attention to this segment. So, what were the causes for the Battle of Plassey? So, causes में हम देखेंगे पहले दो types के. One were what the British did, and the other were what the Nawabs did. So, what did the British do? Well, first, they were not paying taxes, which was a huge economic loss. Second thing that they started doing, they started writing disrespectful letters. So in these letters, they would humiliate the court of the Nawabs, और उनके बारे में बुरी चीजें लिखते थे that would hurt the ego of the Nawab at the time. And these two things, the Nawabs did not like it. They obviously didn't. They did not like to be disrespected. तो उन्होंने क्या किया? The Nawab at the time, whose name was Siraj-ud-Dawla. Siraj-ud-Dawla was the third Nawab in that generation. तो उसने क्या किया? He took 30,000 troops, 30,000 members की army ली, and he marched towards the British and their trade port in a place called Qasim Bazaar. Please keep this in mind, क्योंकि ये Qasim Bazaar was the Qasim Bazaar incident was the starting of the battle that we are going to see, which was called the Battle of Plassey. So this is the chronology of how the Battle of Plassey started. First, the British refused to pay taxes. Okay. Next, they wrote disrespectful letters humiliating the Nawab, and that hurt the ego of the Nawab. So Nawab ने क्या किया? The Nawab at the time, Siraj-ud-Dawla, what did he do? He took 30,000 troops and marched them to the British forts, which were in a place called Qasim Bazaar. So ऐसे शुरू हुई the Battle of Plassey. So let's read the textbook to understand a few more details. So, how trade led to battles on page number 12. Through the early 18th century, the conflict between the company and the Nawabs of Bengal intensified. After the death of Aurangzeb, the Bengal Nawabs asserted their power and autonomy as other regional powers were doing at the time. Murshid Quli Khan was followed by Alivardi Khan, then Siraj-ud-Dawla as the Nawab of Bengal. Each one of them was a strong ruler. तो यहाँ पे हम देखते हैं एक chronology कि कौन से नवाब थे in Bengal at the time. तो यहाँ पे one thing that we have to keep in mind was all of this was happening while the Mughal government started losing its power and authority. All of this was happening in the year 1707 when Aurangzeb died. So while there was already so much political chaos, the kingdoms, local kingdoms जो थे, they started asserting their own power. क्योंकि अभी उन पे power check करने वाला कोई नहीं है, because the year is 1707 and the Mughal power has come to an end. So it was a huge problem, and these local powers, they started showing their authority. And such was the case of Bengal, where there were three Nawabs. In तीन नवाबों का नाम याद रखिएगा, because the first of these were Murshid Quli Khan, then Alivardi Khan, and finally Siraj-ud-Dawla, as we see here, Siraj-ud-Dawla. So each one of them was a strong ruler. They refused to grant the company concessions, demanded large tributes for the company's right to trade, denied it the right to mint coins, and stopped it from extending fortifications. So what was Siraj-ud-Dawla doing before he marched these troops march these troops into Qasim Bazaar. He actually did three things. So earlier the British were allowed to mint their own coins, यानी वो अपने खुद के coins बना सकते थे और इससे they could manipulate the Bengal economy. Now you may ask how. तो economy कैसे function करती है कि if you function कि if you print a lot of notes or a lot of that particular currency, उस currency की value गिर जाती है. यानी अगर 10 रुपए की वैल्यू थी कल और I start and I doubled the amount of currency that I was printing, then 10 रुपए की वैल्यू आज उस will be able to match that of 20 rupees. इसका मतलब है कि because of the increased manufacturing of coins, the price of the coins falls. Just to give a basic idea. तो ऐसे हो रहा था and Siraj-ud-Daulah did not like that because he wanted his control over the Bengal economy. उसके बाद as we saw, he made sure that they did not press for any more concessions and finally paid taxes. And the most important of all, he did not allow them to build their forts. तो ये forts क्या थी? जैसे हमने देखा था, what the British were doing was they were importing troops, importing army all the way from Britain, और वो forts build कर रहे थे जहाँ पे वहां के military personnel रह रहे थे. So these three were the first steps taken by Siraj-ud-Daulah. So he asked them to stop fortification. Then he made sure that they paid taxes, and he did not allow them to mint their own currency. Okay. Next, we see that the company on its part declared that the unjust demands of the local officials were ruining the trade of the company, and trade could flourish only if the duties were removed. तो अभी they were playing a blaming game. तो क्या कर रहे थे? बंगाल गवर्नमेंट वाले बोल रहे थे कि because of this company हमारी इकोनॉमी इंपैक्ट हो रही है. As a counter to that, ब्रिटिश वाले बोल रहे थे कि तुम्हारी वजह से हमारी इकोनॉमी इफेक्ट हो रही है. Because of your huge taxes and because you are not allowing us to build forts and mint coins, हमारी इकोनॉमी इंपैक्ट हो रही है. We don't care about what's happening to the Bengal economy, लेकिन हमारी इकोनॉमी इंपैक्ट हो रही है. And that was their demand. They said trade would be better for both sides if the British were allowed to trade. But how would the Nawab listen to that? Because this was a stupid demand. इसका मतलब था they did not have to pay taxes. They were allowed to mint their own coins and effectively change the course of the economy if they wanted to. And they'd be allowed to have military people, which was a huge problem for Bengal power at the time. So they could not do that. And जैसे हमने देखा, that led to the Battle of Plassey. So Siraj-ud-Daulah takes his 30,000 troops, lands them in Qasim Bazaar. So he lands those troops in Qasim Bazaar, and that is how began the Battle of Plassey. Now this Battle of Plassey actually implies a lot about, and it talks a lot about British politics. क्योंकि British के लिए एक war नहीं थी. It was more of a political conflict. तो वो अपनी political brain use करते थे, and they used to come up with clever solutions. One such solution was that of puppets. So what the British used to do was they used to promise to one ruler कि अगर British war जीत गई, if the British won the war, then this one person would be allowed to be the king of that area. So if you still don't understand, after winning the war, the British themselves will not control the kingdom. वो खुद control नहीं करेंगे. Instead वो क्या करेंगे, एक ऐसे person को लगाएंगे उस kingdom की seat पे जो उनके सारे orders सुने. So they would promise other people that they'd give them the throne of that particular place if the war was won by the British. So obviously, how could you refuse? No person at the time could refuse such a huge offer. So one such puppet went by the name of Mir Jafar. He was the commander of the largest regiment, the largest group of people in Siraj-ud-Daulah's army. So it was the largest regiment basically. And what the British told him was, अच्छा, you don't have to fight for it. So the British told him, तुम्हें हमारे लिए लड़ने की जरूरत नहीं है. You don't fight for us. It's fine if you don't fight for us. लेकिन तुम उसके लिए भी लड़ाई मत करना. So they asked Mir Jafar not to participate in the war at all. They said कि तुम अपनी regiment के साथ कहीं और चले जाओ, but do not participate in the war. Then Mir Jafar said, मुझे क्या मिलेगा इससे? What will I earn? Then the British used their puppet politics. उन्होंने क्या बोला कि if the British win the war, then हम क्या करेंगे? हम तुम्हें नवाब बनाएंगे. हम नवाब खुद नहीं बनेंगे, हम तुम्हें नवाब बनाएंगे. So Mir Jafar could not refuse. He was extremely happy because of something like that. So during the Battle of Plassey, Mir Jafar refused to take his army into battle, and that caused the loss of Siraj-ud-Daulah. Let's read the textbook for a few more details. So page number 12, Battle of Plassey. When Alivardi Khan died in 1756, Siraj-ud-Daulah became the new Nawab of Bengal. The company was worried about his power and keen on a puppet ruler who would be willing to give trade concessions and other privileges. यानी ब्रिटिश को जो चाहिए वो सारी चीजें इस puppet के द्वारा करवा सकते थे. So after so here we see that Siraj-ud-Daulah wanted to negotiate with the company at first, but when negotiations failed, he marched his 30,000 troops to Qasim Bazar. अभी मैं ये कासिम बाजार वाला इंसिडेंट 3 बार बता चुका हूं, एंड व्हाई आई एम रिपीटिंग इट सो ऑफन इज बिकॉज अगर एक क्वेश्चन आए कि व्हाट लेड टू द बैटल ऑफ प्लासी, हर कोई लिख देता है ओ द ब्रिटिश डिड दिस, द नवाब्स डिड दिस, बट हर कोई भूल जाता है कि एक्चुअली शुरू हुई थी विद सिराजुद्दौला मार्चिंग हिज 30,000 ट्रूप्स टू कासिम बाजार. तो ये इंसिडेंट बहुत ही इंपॉर्टेंट है फॉर क्वेश्चन एंड आंसर्स एंड इवन फॉर ऑब्जेक्टिव टाइप क्वेश्चन. तो प्लीज कीप दैट इन माइंड. ओके. Now coming back to our chronology, negotiations fail, and so he does the and so happens the Qasim Bazar incident. And let's see what happened after that. On hearing the news of the fall of Calcutta, actually, I forgot to mention one thing. After Mir Jafar marched his troops to Qasim Bazar, it was technically not Mir Jafar, sorry, Siraj-ud-Daulah marched his troops to Qasim Bazar. It was essentially a victory for the Bengalis. The Bengal government had secured its victory. But तब क्या हुआ? The East India Company did not want to lose. At any cost, उनको जीतना था. So the first thing they did was establish this puppets, and they made Mir Jafar their puppet. और उसके बाद उन्होंने क्या किया? They were settled in different places across India. One such place was the Presidency of Madras. तो उन्होंने क्या किया? जो सारी ट्रूप्स थी मद्रास की, they shifted those troops and their regiments in the Bengal. So abhi the British had outnumbered the Bengal government. So because of the puppet politics and because of this, the Battle of Plassey was lost by Siraj-ud-Daulah. Now this incident is very important, and to tell you the dates, it happened in the year. So when he marched with 30,000 troops, the year was 1757. Now ये दोनों चीजें बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है, मीर जाफर और ईयर 1757, क्योंकि मीर जाफर is often cited as the person because of whom we came under colonial power. ऐसे सोचिए, if Mir Jafar did not do whatever he did, if he did not act as a puppet for the British, then Siraj-ud-Daulah would have won, or probably, or mostly he wouldn't have faced the losses, right? तो उस वजह से अगर सिराज-उद-दौला नहीं हारता तो ब्रिटिश को अपनी पावर नहीं मिलती, एंड अगर पावर नहीं मिलती तो we wouldn't have had that 2 centuries of colonial rule. So he is often cited as the reason that we were under the British, and it all started in the year 1757. So let's look at what happened next. After the defeat at Plassey, Siraj-ud-Daulah was assassinated and Mir Jafar was made the new Nawab, क्योंकि ब्रिटिश ने प्रॉमिस किया था कि हम तुम्हें नवाब बनाएंगे. The company was still unwilling to take over the responsibilities of administration. Its prime objective was the expansion of trade. If this could be done without conquest through the help of local rulers who were willing to grant privileges, the territories need not be taken over directly. British, they kind of feared conflict. उनको ये नहीं चाहिए था कि एक और वॉर लड़ी जाए जिस वजह से उनको भी लॉसेस मिले. They did not want any wars. They wanted a peaceful solution, but they wanted to be the rulers. तो उन्होंने क्या किया? They implied their puppet politics और मीर जाफर को लीडर बना दिया, and they started doing this whole puppet politics thing in all of India. So धीरे धीरे they start, and that is how they started shooting from other soldiers, quite literally. So let's look at what happened after that. Soon, the company discovered that this was rather difficult, for even the puppet Nawabs were not always as helpful as the company wanted them to be. Now, अभी आप सोचिए, क्या was Mir Jafar a completely pure person? Was he going to be loyal? अभी आप सोचिए, someone who betrayed Sirajuddaula, would he really listen to the British? Absolutely not. British को वही thought आई. And it's the fact that if Mir Jafar was not power hungry, and if he did not want to do something with the kingdom of Bengal, then why would he have accepted the British offer? समझ रहे हो? So if he was not power hungry, then he would not have accepted the British offer, and it means that he still is power hungry. So the British are scared कि क्या पता कल he will attack on us, he betrays us. So you never know. And the British were scared about that. तो उन्होंने क्या किया? They replaced Mir Jafar with another person named Mir Qasim. So Mir Qasim was now to be the new Nawab of Bengal. Now let's read how they did that. What could the company do? When Mir Jafar protested, the company deposed him and installed Mir Qasim in his place. When Mir Qasim complained, he in turn was defeated in a battle fought at Buxar in the year 1764. Now obviously, applying the same logic that they applied to Mir Jafar, Mir Qasim was probably not all completely loyal as well, right? Varna wo, again, why would he take up that offer if he was absolutely loyal to his kingdom? So Mir Qasim also started becoming power hungry, and British do not like that. तो उन्होंने अभी क्या किया? They defeated Mir Qasim in a battle which was led by Mir Jafar. So they made Mir Qasim fight with Mir Jafar in the Battle of Buxar. The Battle of Buxar, which happened exactly in the year 1764. So Battle of Buxar, 1764. So they kind of made Mir Jafar fight with Mir Qasim and gave Mir Jafar the role of the Nawab of Bengal. But this was a ton of political turmoil. You have to understand that in the span of 10 years, the rulers changed thrice, and the British could not keep up with that pace. Because say you start some project, तुमने कोई project शुरू कर दिया, और let's say you're the chief minister of a country and you started a project. But अभी क्या हो रहा है? हर एक 2-3 साल में एक नया chief minister आ रहा है. There's no stability in who is becoming the chief minister. एंड उस वजह से जो प्रोजेक्ट शुरू हुआ था वो खत्म ही नहीं हो रहा. इन द सेम वे जो ब्रिटिश की जो ट्रेड पॉलिसीज थी जो वो इम्पोज करना चाहते थे वो खत्म हो ही नहीं रही थी. एंड दैट वाज बिकॉज द रूलर्स वर चेंजिंग सो ऑफन, एंड एवरी रूलर हैज अ डिफरेंट पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू एंड दे वांट टू डू डिफरेंट थिंग्स. तो मीर जाफर actually died in the year 1765, and now there was no ruler of Bengal. So the British decided to do something, क्योंकि अभी they were tired of so many Nawabs coming and going, so many local rulers, and they began having mistrust. They did not want to trust these locals anymore. So the British themselves became Nawabs. But these Nawabs were in England, they were referred to as Nabobs, which was an anglicized pronunciation of the word Nawab. And these Nabobs, as they were called, actually had a really interesting role to play in society, and that is what the next section is all about. So let me quickly explain what their role in society was. So basically, ये Nabobs क्या करने लग गए थे? These new British Nawabs, what they started doing was they started taking wealth and taxes for themselves. So the wealth was all for themselves, and tax money was also for themselves. तो इस वजह से क्या हो रहा था? They were starting to become rich. In fact, one of the biggest examples of this was a man named Robert Clive. So Robert Clive is an interesting figure because he was the first person to map out India. He was the first person to draw a map for India. Robert Clive was next in line for being Nabob. So Robert Clive himself had actually been deployed to remove this whole system of collecting najayaz taxes and having illegal wealth, he was actually taken there to remove corruption. Turns out that he himself was extremely corrupt, and a figure like him became synonymous with what a nabob was. Basically, in British eyes, a nabob was someone who was a huge hypocrite, who was extremely counterproductive. और उसे तुम जो काम करने के लिए भेजोगे वो उसका एकदम उल्टा करके आएंगे. And that is how they were made fun of in British culture. And that's the role that the Nawabs played. So that is what it means to be Nawab or Nabob in this case in those years, in the 18th century, while being British. So let's see what happens next. After we look at this Nabob culture, we will be looking at something even more interesting. The company now has started to expand its rule. तो उन्हें समझ आ गया कि हम ये puppet politics अभी play नहीं कर सकते. Now we have to directly rule the place as they did in Bengal. So between the years 1757-ish and 1857, in that one century, they had started to bring these policies into effect. The first of their policies was called the subsidiary alliance. So what is the subsidiary alliance? So what the subsidiary alliance said was कि no king was allowed to maintain an army. मतलब अपनी खुद की personal army वो maintain नहीं कर सकते थे. Instead, what they had to do was they had to buy troops. So they could not maintain their own armies, but they had to buy everything from the British. तो इस तरह से ब्रिटिश को पैसे मिल रहे थे because they had to buy troops. The British were receiving a lot of money and उस जमाने में बहुत सारे kingdoms हुआ करते थे. तो इस तरह से they used their first money making tactic, but that's not where it stopped. When they realized that some people were refusing to buy these troops from them, उन्होंने क्या किया? They said कि if you refuse to buy troops, then a part of your kingdom will be seized. A part of your kingdom will be seized by the British. तो ऐसे ब्रिटिश के जो दो ऑब्जेक्टिव्स थे जिस वजह से वो ये कर रहे थे, both were being fulfilled. They were receiving money at first because they had to pay to buy troops, and next when this land was being seized, उस वजह से they were receiving more land to establish more factories and townships and further expand their trade. तो इस तरह से the British started thinking of their profits and hence began their first conquering tactic, which is called the subsidiary alliance. So keep this in mind because this was the first of its kind and the first it was the first expansionary tactic that they used. So एक बार textbook पढ़ लेते हैं to understand how they did it. So let's read the second paragraph on page 15 under company rule expands. After the Battle of Buxar in 1764, the company appointed residents in Indian states. This is an interesting concept that I forgot to mention. So what they were still playing puppet politics. Another aspect of their puppet politics was something called residents. तो ये residents कौन थे? Residents were basically normal people in the king's court. But इन residents को ब्रिटिश वालों ने पे करके रखा था. So they were paid by the British to keep an eye on what was happening in the court. So they were kind of like spies. So let's see how. Or commercial agents, and their job was to serve and further the interests of the companies. So ये वाली line बहुत important है क्योंकि last year I remember in our half yearly exams एक question आया था who were residents. ये question कोई आंसर नहीं कर पाया क्योंकि ये एक छोटा सा line है. So people often forget reading this. So make sure you read this. So who were residents? They were political or commercial agents, and their job was to serve and further the interests of the company. So ये line please याद रखिएगा, and if you can use a highlighter to highlight this line. Okay, let's read what happened next. Through the residents, the company officials began interfering in the internal affairs of Indian states. They tried to decide who was to be the successor and who was to be appointed in administrative posts. Sometimes the company forced the states into a subsidiary alliance. So, according to the terms of this alliance, Indian rulers were not allowed to have their own army. They were to be protected by the company, all while they had to pay for subsidiary forces that the company was supposed to maintain for the purpose of this protection. And if the Indian rulers failed to make their payment, their kingdom would be seized. Two kingdoms which came under the conquering of the subsidiary alliance were those of Hyderabad. So Hyderabad had came under siege. So first came Hyderabad, and next came Awadh. So these two were seized because of the subsidiary alliance. So if you enjoyed the video, then please make sure to like and subscribe and click the bell icon to remain notified. If you know someone who is interested in videos like these, then please do share these videos with them. And I'll see you in the next one.